One of the more interesting things in the Democratic Party's race with its candidates, I can't keep track of who's in and who's out. It's a little difficult. I believe that Michael Bloomberg is back in. Hillary Clinton is making noises that she may be in. Somebody else announced today, forgot who it was. No. Who was somebody? What? Yes, Deval Patrick, the ex-governor of Massachusetts. That's right. He announced he's going to step in, and then there are other people stepping out. So it's not too clear. And you can see the positioning. You know, those of you who did, since we've been here last, Mrs. Clinton declared that Tulsi Gabbard was a Russian asset. An amazing. I mean, the poor woman. You know, she lost the race. She had to blame somebody. She chose the Russians. What else? And now they are at the base of every evil she can imagine. I mean, they're everywhere. They're right under the bed, the way they were in the Cold War. It's amazing. Anyway, there are two interesting candidates, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, I would argue. And one of the things they've both done, differently, but they've both done it, is to introduce and to make legitimate the whole question of taxing wealth. And I want to talk to you about that tonight. I'm going to mention a little bit about the specifics of each of them, but that's not what I am interested in your walking away with. You can look that up. You don't need me for that. I want to get at what's at stake here and why this is an important change that both of those candidates are bringing to the level of discourse in this country, and to make sure you all know. Basically, the idea in both of them is to tax the super rich. In the case of Elizabeth Warren, I believe her cutoff point is it's either $50 or $30 million. So that the first 30 million, some of you can now really relax. The first 30 million you have, what?
On the Warren's plan is 50.
Yes, I mean, I'm talking, but Warren is 50, fine. And then I think it's 2% for 50, and then 3% if you have 100 or whatever the number. It doesn't matter. Because whatever she says, she will adjust. She'll have to adjust that if she ever gets to that point. So these are notional ideas. She wants to get across what she's going to try for, but don't get stuck on the particular numbers. Those will change in any way. And that's true for Bernie or anybody else. But the first big chunk, 50 million, so obviously what she's telling the American people is that the vast majority of you are not affected by it. Your wealth is nothing we're going to touch, so you can relax. Right? It's only the super wealthy that we're going to go after. And they actually do the count. It's 100,000 families or 200,000 families in a population of 325 million people. This is very small. This is, you know, half of 1% or less than that. Of the people. And that's true for Bernie too, although Bernie has then changed it and come down a good ways. I believe his cutoff now is 16.5 million. It's where he starts or something like that. And then he has, or 32 for a couple, 16.5 for an individual. But again, the particular numbers are not the issue. So let's talk about that. Taxing wealth. First of all, do we tax wealth in the United States? And the answer is yes, we do. So this is not a new idea. Back in American history, many states have taxed wealth at the state level. The federal government, to my knowledge, has never done that. The federal government has mostly taxed either income, the major source of its revenue, or expenditure. They get you either when you earn the money or when you spend the money, but they don't get you on what you've accumulated as your stock of wealth. It's very important you understand that. They don't do it. By the way, are they precluded from doing that? No. That's a choice, a political choice they made. They're going to tax income, and they're going to tax expenditure. Now, right away, before we go anywhere, let's be sure we all understand the economics here. If you are a person who only earns enough that you basically have to spend what you earn to keep yourself going, you're going to be taxed twice. First on the income, and then on the expenditure. You all get it. You all pay income tax. If you live in New York City, you pay income tax, or at least many of you do, to the federal government, to the state of New York, and to the city, because unlike most American cities, we have a city income tax. And then when you go into a store and buy something, the price you pay has a sales tax attached to it. So you are, ready? Double tax. Keep that in your mind, because one of the favorite ploys of conservatives in this country is to scream about taxes that we're going to be double taxed, as if this is an outrage. And you should understand, that's the norm. And I'm going to show you, you're not double taxed. You're triple taxed. I'm going to show you that. We're going to get to it. So what is the wealth? Who taxes wealth now in the United States? Not the federal government, and really not the state government either. It's the local governments that do that. The cities and the towns. That is, in fact, the major source of revenue at the town-city level. The municipal level, we call it in economics, depends on a property tax, a tax of your holding, your wealth, what you own. The major kinds of property that are taxed are land, buildings like homes, automobiles, business inventories, boats, that's right, in some places, not all. Because it's done at the municipal level, it can vary. A municipality can exempt this kind of property or add that kind of property. But in general, it's what in economics is called tangible property. That is, property you can touch, like a piece of land or a building or a business inventory or a car or a boat, okay? That is taxed, which now means that if you earn income and you spend it on goods and services, and you live in a town, which is what we all do, you get taxed, ready? 3 times, don't you? Here's how a property tax works. Every town has a town assessor. If you go to your town city hall, you'll see an office, assessor or tax assessor. That person's job is to assess, to evaluate the value of all the taxable, tangible property in each town. That man or woman in the office that they have measures how much land John has and how many boats Mary has and how much the building is worth in which Peter lives, etc., and then sends them a bill each year in which they assess a certain percentage of the value the assessor has put on that property. So you need the assessor to tell you what it's worth, and then the town says you got to give us 2.6% of your holdings. Understand? So you're taxing property. But here's the wonderful thing. No city and town, and no state government, and no federal government taxes intangible wealth in America. What's that? Stocks, bonds, cash. By the way, there's not the slightest problem in doing that. We know exactly, because of the way the Securities and Exchange Commission works stock markets, we know exactly how many stocks you have. It's recorded every time you buy them. When you sell them, you get the little slip. Those of you who know how this is done, the records are easy. We know how much you got. And if the government wanted to tax intangible wealth, it could. And by the way, intangible wealth is even larger as a tax base than tangible wealth. So what in the world is going on? Why would you tax? By the way, let me explain so you can see the drama. If you have a $100,000 house anywhere, you pay a property tax to the town in which that house is located. If you sell the house and have $100,000 of cash, which you use to buy $100,000 of stock, your property tax is 0. You have exactly the same wealth, but you now hold it in a form that is not subject to tax. That's the law. Well, in the United States, the majority of people have no wealth. I say that because I don't want those of you who don't have any to feel alone. Okay? Most people have no wealth. the sizable minority that have some wealth in America have a home. That's the overwhelmingly dominant property that most Americans have, if they have any at all. Okay, that means that it's a tiny minority who have the intangible wealth. Roughly 10% of the people own roughly 80% of the shares. They are the richest people. Nobody else can afford to buy shares because you either live off your income and you spend it for your food, shelter, and clothing, or if you have a little more, you buy a house or a condo or a co-op or whatever. Only the richest can do all the spending they want and have a house or two and then accumulate shares of stock. We have a wealth tax system that exempts the richest people's major source of holding wealth. At this point, if we had more time, I would stop speaking and I would play the national anthem. Because look what I've just told you. You live in this, what I just described. This is the grotesquest injustice imaginable. This is no different than my moving amongst you and deftly reaching into your pocketbook or your wallet and removing whatever green pieces of paper I can find. This is crazy. And by the way, it violates even American history. I used to teach at Yale. Yale is in the state of Connecticut. And so I did some research in Connecticut. And one of the things I did as a researcher is I said, what was the first tax that was ever paid? Back in colonial days when Connecticut was part of the British colony here. The first tax in Connecticut was a tax in shares of a canal. New Haven is on the Long Island Sound. It's on the water. Hartford is the capital. It's in the interior. And those are the two biggest cities. And so they wanted to build a canal that would allow shipping to go from New Haven up to Hartford. And they raised the money by selling shares to, of course, who? The rich people. Nobody else could buy the shares. And then the state had the great idea, let's tax the shares. That was the first tax was a tax on intangible property. But the people who are rich don't want to pay taxes. It's going to come as a shock to you, I know, but the rich people don't want to pay taxes, and they figured out that if they use a small part of their wealth to buy the political system, it'll be cheaper because they will avoid the taxes that they would otherwise have to pay. This is a good deal. So they're eager to donate to politicians to get the law to do what? Well, I just told you what. You could overnight transform America if you simply taxed intangible property at the same rate you now tax tangible property. Ask yourself why $1 million in stock pays no tax, but $1 million house does. What? What's the logic here? And the answer is, logic is not the issue. The issue is the people who have a lot of money, the more they concentrate the wealth in their hands, the more they understand their own vulnerability. The bigger the gap between where most of us are and where those super rich people are, the more tempting, sooner or later, we will be. And there will be people like, Bernie, or Elizabeth Warren, or look at me, people like me who are suggesting it doesn't have to be this way. We are the majority. We ought to be voting in politicians who will do what ought to have been done. Indeed, one of Elizabeth Warren's things is she compares, which I'm going to do with you in a minute, she compares the estate tax, which is another kind of property tax I'm going to get to in a minute. She compares what it was under George W. Bush with what it is now. And she did a little calculation. If we went back to what it was under George Bush, the trillions of dollars that would be available. Because even in the last 20 years, we have cut and cut the taxes on property. Estate tax is another kind of property tax. okay? It's not the normal kind because it's not levied on you when you're alive. It's levied on your estate. After you die, whatever you have left is passed to whoever you choose to leave it to. Say your children or anyone, it doesn't matter. And there are laws about that you should pay a tax. This comes from a very old idea that some of you may have in your minds. This is the idea that we all ought to have an equal starting point. In other words, we should all start with the same chances and let the best man or woman win based on his or her abilities, hard work, ingenuity, blah, 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 blah. That it isn't fair or just that some of us start with an inheritance of $10 million and the other one starts with a debt. That this means you don't have an equal opportunity society. It's undemocratic. And so the idea was the way you deal with this is you tax people, not while they're living, if they've accumulated a lot of money, have a good time, enjoy yourself, but when you die, you can't give an unfair advantage to somebody else. And so we're going to tax your estate. That's where it comes from. It's done in most societies one way or another. For some of you that have a religious background, you know what it's like? It's like the ancient idea of Jubilee, that periodically you rearrange things so you don't harden inequality over the generations. Remember in early communities, there would be every 30 years or 20 years, you'd take the land and you'd redivide it. So you were lucky, you had a great piece, it rains there, the soil is wonderful. These people had a hard time because they got sand. Well, we're going to do a lottery and you'll have your chance with the sand. You know, good luck to you. In other words, we make it fluid. We don't allow the hardening of inequality to be passed down. So that's the idea. Okay, so let me give you an idea of the number. In 2000, the year 2000, George W. Bush's beginning, the amount of money that was exempted, that you could leave to your heirs and pay no federal estate tax, was $675,000. Today, an individual can leave $11.4 million without paying any federal income. Do you understand? Do you understand? 25 times greater amount of money. The rate of inflation wasn't remotely like that. That's just a gift to rich people. That's all that is. Nothing else, not necessary. It's just here. You're a millionaire? Good. Your children will be millionaires too. Not as a result of anything they did other than really what you and your husband or you and your wife did. You did it, there they are, and now they're millionaires. Okay? Strange, very strange. The top rate, you didn't pay on the first $675,000. But everything above that, you were subjected to an estate tax, which went up the more you left to a cap of 55%. Okay? Now, not only do you not pay on the first 11.4, but the top rate now is 40%. Right? These are enormous gifts to the rich, to the richest amongst us. So when you hear the federal government, we can't afford to help students with student loans, that is, I'm going to use a very important technical term, that is horse shit. That's what that is. And the worst, smelliest sort. There is no shortage of funds to do anything. There is an unwillingness, politically motivated, to tax wealth even only at the rates we once did. These are not proposals to do something we haven't already done. These are proposals to undo the gifts to the rich that have been munificent beyond language.
Making America great again.
Yes, making America great again. That's right. All right. A week ago, the Federal Reserve released the latest numbers, just to drive this point home to you, about wealth in America. I thought you'd be interested. The top 10% of Americans' wealth, if you add it all together, trillions of dollars, is just shy of 2 times the total wealth of the other 90%. Let me do that again. The 10% richest Americans have almost together twice the total wealth that the other 90% have. Now, this is a country marching toward, with great excitement, replicating Egyptian pyramid societies. And you all know this. You know, you go to that Madison Park, those very tall towers at the south end of Madison Park. You know, Rupert Murdoch, I believe, has the top 3 floors of one of them. Okay, he paid, I don't know, $80 million. That's it. That's it. That's it. You pass it all the time, because a lot of it's here in New York. You get to see it up close, personal. There is no possible justification in a society as unequal as this one for there to be the tax structure I just told you about. The only really interesting thing, once you get the numbers, is the equanimity, the placid acceptance of the people of this society to live in this, to actually listen to a Republican or Democrat agonizing over the difficulty of finding funding for what? There's no difficulty. The funding is screaming at you. You just don't have the genital equipment, I'm being careful, to go after it. You're not going to do the political work. You're not going to rouse the people. And by the way, this is as true of the Democrats, although Bernie and Elizabeth are a little bit different. They do have proposals to tax the rich. They don't talk about the tangible, intangible, the way they ought to. It would help their case if they made it clearer to people how unfair the tax system already is. They tend to focus so much on how we could get more from the rich that they open themselves up to a critique that we're somehow targeting the rich. Isn't that unfair? We're going to redistribute income. We shouldn't do that. Without understanding, your whole life you just lived through a redistribution accomplished by the tax structure. They cut the taxes on the people who needed it least and didn't do that for the people who needed it the most. You are the victim. You silly person. What's the matter with you? How many times do you have to be kicked economically before finally? And the answer is we never know. We don't know what sparks people to see and understand, right? In Lebanon right now, there's people in a remarkable way, mostly young women, who in that society particularly have not played this kind of role before, who are the leaders of a revolutionary movement. It's extraordinary. Which is why many of your faces indicate you don't know much about it. You should, particularly those of you of the female persuasion. Is a remarkable demonstration of women taking political and revolutionary leadership and doing a very good job. The Prime Minister's already gone. The only thing even more impressive is what's going on in Chile, where people are likewise protesting. 10 days ago, 5% of the population went into the streets. Chile has roughly 20 million people. 1 million went into the streets. In this country, that would mean 15 million people in the streets. We've never had that in this country's history, ever. That's what they achieved. And they were angry about, guess what? The inequality of wealth and income, as they were in Lebanon. Just a footnote, because I know this is going to hurt somebody. That's not what's going on in Hong Kong. This lumping together of Hong Kong, yes, there are people in the streets, there are battle in the streets, they have that in common. But I mean, that's it? That's enough? So you want to know why they're in the street? They're not asking for pastrami sandwiches, they have different objectives. In Hong Kong, they want to be the special British or American colony that they were for most of the 20th century. They don't want to be like the rest of China. And I'm not going to take a side whether they should. That's the issue. They have a political disagreement about the organizations of political and other processes. They don't want to be integrated into China. They want to continue what they were able to get as an export-import financial center on the edges of China. That's the fight. It's not a fight about inequality. By the way, Hong Kong is a horrifically unequal place. But that's not what the fight is about. So they shouldn't be lumped together unless the only thing that matters is whether people are throwing gasoline bombs in the street, which in each case they are. It's extraordinary. Let me continue. Argument of conservatives. Other countries have tried wealth taxes and don't have them. That's simply not true. I mean, that you can only get away with that in this country if you can count on people not knowing and having no either mechanism or incentive to go find out. Most countries in Europe, for example, have wealth taxes. Some more, some less. Some have tried them and gotten rid of them. Others have not tried them and then tried them, etc. But the notion that other countries have not done this, so we shouldn't do it, that's just make-believe. But it's interesting they have to do that because they don't have very good arguments against it. So they have to invent them. It's very, very important. Okay. Criticism of wealth taxes. This is the most important one that I hear. I can't tell you how many times I get this. Well, if we tax wealth, the people who own the wealth will move it out of the country. Right? And then people remember, there's a famous French actor, Gérard Depardieu, who caused a storm in the last 2 or 3 years. He was angry about the taxes in France, so I don't know if you know the story. He went and arranged to become a Russian citizen, which with Putin made it an arrangement because they wanted a bank account in Moscow, not in Paris, okay? Yes, there are examples of people who, to escape their wealth tax, move their wealth around. Here's an example. Florida has a lower tax rate than New York. Mr. Trump is moving. Stunning example, by the way. In another country, that would be the end of your political career, what you just did there. That is your way of evading taxes. That's what that is. If you had a national system worth anything, you'd have a uniform tax rate so that you could go wherever you want and you're going to pay the same tax, whether you're in Oklahoma or Florida or Oregon or New Jersey. It wouldn't make any difference. That would be easy. The federal government collects it and reimburses it to the states where you are located. No problem at all. And since intangible property has to be recorded, it's easy to track. Well, they might go illegal. Well, that's absolutely true. And the reason we know that they will do illegal things to save on property taxes is because they already do. And we know exactly what it is. We even have estimates. Gabriel Zuckman, these are names you should know. At the University of California in Berkeley, there is a group of economists who are now the world #1 authorities on the distribution of wealth and income. Everybody uses their work. Emmanuel Saez is the key guy, S-A-E-Z, Emmanuel Saez. He works closely with a French economist whose name you probably do know, Thomas Piketty. And their prime student, the young man who they both trained, Gabriel Zuckman, Z-U-C-M-A-N, who's also a faculty person at UCal Berkeley. They have a website, it's free, and all of their research is there, and everybody uses it. It's the best statistical collection, not just for the United States, everywhere. They have a lot of funding, they do a lot of research. Interestingly, they are all of them, all three of them, advisors, if I understand correctly, both to Bernie and to Elizabeth Warren. They consider themselves, these professors, socialists. And despite that, their work is used, as I say, almost everywhere. There are countless stories using their statistics in the Wall Street Journal, in the Financial Times, and all of those. And nobody else has the accumulated the data and the studies and the prestige that they have. If you're interested in any of that, go there. And Zuckman has made estimates of how much wealth is held offshore in the Bahamas, in the Turk and Caicos Island. A lot of the Caribbean is used that way. Certain parts of Europe, Cyprus is used that way. Luxembourg is used that way. Malta is used. A variety of places. Switzerland used to be, and to some extent still is, but is no longer the only place. Because it's very lucrative. You can hide the money there, so the people who want to hide money are happy to pay fees. And it's just like it's a mail drop. It's an office somewhere. It's very easy to arrange. Yeah, it's, Panama Papers. That's right. When that firm got hacked, I forget the name of it. There's yeah, that's right. That firm down there was hacked and its stuff was found. So we know where it is. We know who has it. If the United States cared, it could go to these little countries, and it should take, I wouldn't get it, 2 seconds. Or tell the country, you know, you have to turn over all of that asset and all of that records, or else, you know, we're going to bomb you back into the Stone Age. If you cared. The United States doesn't care. Neither do the British or the French or all the others who hide their money there. The French don't use these kinds of islands the way others do because they have a long-standing arrangement with Geneva. It's much easier for a French person to get in your car, drive a couple hours, you're in Geneva, you can get it all done. The Swiss are very eager to accommodate, and so that's the way. My family's French, I know whereof I speak. So let's get to this redistribution question in the time we have left. I've talked about this before, but somehow I need to go through this repeatedly because there's something that resists me here in these audiences. Is a change in the tax structure, for example, taxing wealth, taxing intangible wealth, taxing tangible wealth at new levels, taxing income at higher levels the way they want to, and so on. This is a redistribution of wealth. Absolutely it is. Of course it is. It is a redistribution. The only difference it is from previous redistributions is the direction of the redistribution, not the existence of the redistribution. Redistribution is what the different classes in this country fight over at the level of the state. They're always fighting to redistribute wealth and income. That's what they do. So the only interesting question is, how's it going? Who's losing and who's winning? And I hope I've shown you that you, most of you and people like you and me are, don't take this the wrong way, losers in this arrangement. But it doesn't have to be that way. We could redistribute. We could. We could change the tax structure. That's really what Bernie and Elizabeth Warren are trying to do. They're trying to redistribute the other way by changing the tax structures, reversing what has been done in the last 30 or 40 years. And you do know, because the history here is important, the reason the redistribution went from the poor and the middle to those at the top in the last 40 years was a concerted effort by those people because they had been outraged by the redistribution the other way in the 30s and 40s. When the Depression hit in 1929, and suddenly millions of Americans were without a job, were without income, without any wherewithal to make their mortgage payments, so they lost their homes. You know, the scenario you may remember from reading The Grapes of Wrath or books like that, where it's all laid out, usually better than economists ever did it. What happened in that Great Depression was extraordinary in American history. You had a revolution from below. 4 organizations, again, I keep telling this history, but I can tell from your faces that it's not all there yet. So there were the following 4. The greatest union organizing drive in the history of the United States, the CIO, 1930, 1940. More people joined labor unions in that short period of time than had ever done so before, and that have ever done so since. We've never had it again. Millions of people made the following calculation. For me and my family, I've got a better chance to get through this depression if I join a union than if I don't. A very basic idea. And that idea, of course, had to be taught, had to be persuaded. And that function fell to 3 political organizations, 2 socialist parties and a communist party, who had tens or hundreds of thousands of members in those years. Those were big, powerful organizations, and they worked very closely with the CIO to bring all these people minimally into the labor movement, maximally into these socialist and communist parties. And they were, the socialists and communists, the leaders, the militants, whatever you want to call them. And they succeeded. They went to Roosevelt, the president, again, and they said to him basically, not in these words, but this was the message. We represent tens of millions of people suffering through this depression, which they did, and Roosevelt knew it. We voted you in, and if you don't do something for us, we're going to vote you out. So it's your call, Mr. Roosevelt. Mr. Roosevelt wasn't stupid. He understood what he was being told. He went back to the corporations and the rich. He knew them all because he was one of them. So was his family. And he said to them, I just had this meeting with the communists, the socialists, and the unions, and here's what they told me, what I just told you. And I advise you to help me. Because with all this unemployment, the government has no money. I can't do what they want me to do for them because I don't have the resources. You do, looking right at them. You've got the money. So here's the deal. You got to give me half your money so I can take care of the mass of the people. And that way, I will stay in office. And I got to tell you, the communists and socialists, they winked at me. And I know what the wink meant. It's 1930. That's only 13 years after the revolution in Russia. Everybody had that in their head. You don't give me the money, I don't take care of them. Here's my advice. You won't have any money to give anybody. It'll be over. He persuaded half of them. The other half he never persuaded. They wanted him to use the army to kill all those people. Those are the ancestors of the Koch brothers. But he only needed half of them. He only needed half of them. Yeah, Liberty League and other organizations. But half of them believed, they didn't like it, but they believed what Roosevelt was telling them. That's all he needed. He went back to the socialists, communists, and unions, and he said, okay, I got a deal. Got a deal. I'm going to do more for the suffering millions in this country than you even asked me to. I'm going to do it. But you got to do something for me. No more talking about revolution, none of that. That stuff's got to stop. Because if you do that, I can't get this deal. And then I will do nothing for you. I can't do anything. And then those other people are going to take over and they're going to shoot you with the military. We're going to have a civil war. The socialists and the communists and the unions made the deal. They bought the deal. There were dissenters. Not everybody agreed, but they bought the deal. And the deal was done. And Roosevelt taxed corporations and the rich more than any president had ever done. And he used the money for those 4 basic programs. Social Security, we never had a social security system before. Think about it. In the midst of a depression when the government has no money, it decides to have a program in which everybody who's 65 years of age or older gets a check every month for the rest of his or her life. It's an amazing thing to do when you have no money. The second thing, the unemployment compensation. You lose your job. Those were years when millions of people had no job. You get a check every week for a year or two to kind of help you through. Number 3, the first minimum wage. We've never done that before. And number 4, a public employment, a public jobs program that gave work to 15 million people who therefore didn't lose their home because they could keep up their mortgage payments and all the rest. He did it. He took money from corporations and the rich and helped average people in a way that had never been done before. The mass of people thought Mr. Roosevelt walked on water. He was reelected 3 times in a row. No president had ever had that happen before. We didn't have the law yet that limits you to 2 terms. That law was passed after Roosevelt died in 1945 to prevent, for the Republicans, this happening again. They were traumatized. Let me just repeat the lesson. The president who taxes corporations and the rich to help average people is the most popular president the country ever had. There were some of us who went to Obama and said, you know how you're going to be a great president, Mr. Obama? Do that. He didn't. And that missed his only chance to be what he could have been. What he could have been, but he didn't.